Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the information session for Columbia Climate School's Climate Impacts Uncovering Injustice in Disaster Preparedness and Recovery pre-college workshop. My name is Laurel Zaima. I'm the program manager of the professional learning, the pre-college programs, and the K-12 and educator offerings at the Columbia Climate School. And I'm joined today by the instructor of this pre-college workshop, Josh Vincenzo from the National Center for Disaster Preparedness. And over the next 30 minutes, we're going to be sharing more information about this pre-college workshop that's offered this fall. But I just wanted to give a little bit of an introduction about the Columbia Climate School in case you are unfamiliar or are just learning about the new school. So our mission is to develop, and inspire knowledge-based solutions that educate future leaders for just and prosperous societies on a healthy planet. So this is actually the first new school at Columbia University in the past 25 years. So we're extremely excited about the launch of the Climate School. The school is set up in a way that allows us to better connect, amplify, and advance new areas of climate inquiry, research, and impact across all the Columbia Research Institutes and out into the world and beyond. We have a variety of different educational opportunities at the Columbia Climate School that all provide interdisciplinary knowledge that is essential for climate leaders across a diversity of interests and backgrounds. So in particular, these pre-college programs are targeting high school students that are grades 9th through 12th and rising 9th graders who are really interested in extending their learning in climate and sustainability beyond the classroom. And these pre-college programs, they offer the same level of rigor and quality as our degree programs as they're taught by Columbia faculty, researchers, and practitioners. So these learning opportunities, they really deliver high caliber online programs with a flexible schedule. So knowing that student schedules are so busy, we wanted to ensure that we offer that flexibility for everyone. So all of these workshops are 15 hours in length and they're offered in English. We utilize the Zoom platform, and everything is recorded. So participants will have access to all the recordings and the materials for up to 1 year after the workshop has ended. So there's no need to be worrying about missing a session or if you have to leave early from a session. Everything is recorded so you can be caught up on your own time. There are no required readings or homeworks, but the instructors will provide suggested readings to really expand that knowledge or topic that you had discussed in the workshop. And because there are no transcripts from these pre-college workshops, there will be no grading. And I just want to clarify that everyone at the completion of this workshop will receive a certificate of participation. However, this workshop is a non-credit opportunity. So in participating in this workshop, you are not a student of Columbia University. So this program in this academic year of 2022 to 2023 costs $1,499. There are reduced rates available for different categories, such as current students or those who are former participants of workshops, those who are working in government or the NGO sectors, and people that are alumni of Columbia University. So I will put our email in the chat. If you have any questions about these rates or these reduced rates, you can feel free to email us and we'd be happy to share more about that. The deadline for registration is 2 weeks before the workshop begins. So for this particular workshop, the deadline is October 15th. So with that, I just want to go over a little bit of Zoom etiquette. The chat box is disabled and we won't be using the raised hand function. So if you have any questions for Josh throughout this info session, feel free to use the Q&A box and we'll be able to answer them at the end. Yeah, and so with that, I would love to introduce Josh, who's going to share a little bit more about his pre-college workshop.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Laurel. I'm going to switch over to the screen share really quick. So we can dive right in because I know time is a little limited here. And Laurel, if I go over time, definitely flag me flag me down. As you can see, this is a topic I'm gonna, as I kind of queued up there, very excited about and interested about in terms of teaching and coming up with a workshop around that. So, as Laurel mentioned, the title is Climate Impacts: Uncovering Injustice and Disaster Preparedness and Recovery. A lot of very profound and deep words there in the title, and these are things that we're going to really try to distill throughout the workshop. It's something that is alluded to a lot in our space and research and policy and practice, but rarely and unfortunately far too uncommon is there a whole workshop dedicated to looking at all these topics, how they interrelate, and really developing a lens for this across all different sectors, whether you find yourselves as future scientists, future policy makers, whatever it might be in between. It is really paramount at this point to have this climate justice and justice lens on everything that we approach. So really looking forward to it. My name is Josh DiVincenzo. So for today, I want to just briefly go through an intro and a background of some of the work that I do here at Columbia, but also how it relates most importantly to the course and the workshop that we're here to talk about. I'm also going to go through the goals of the workshop, a little glimpse of the week to week and what to expect, and how my approach to facilitation and learning around these themes is going to be conducted in this workshop. And just so there's no surprises, and just really turning this into more of a fruitful discussion around these themes. And of course, I would love to hear from any folks that have joined us today, any questions you might have, anything I can clarify around the content. So just some quick introductions and disclosures. I am part of Columbia's climate school, as Laurel queued up there. And specifically, I work in a department and a center called the National Center for Disaster Preparedness. So we're really at the forefront of research, policy, and practice as it relates to these climate impacts. And climate impacts have become such a tangible vehicle in the form of disaster events, unfortunately. So we can even look to this week, the disaster event of course, Hurricane Ian in Florida at this very moment, Hurricane Ida right before that in Puerto Rico, and what that means for people. So I think one thing that's unique around the work that my center conducts and the teaching, the research, and the policy that we work on is that it's really tangible in dealing with people's everyday lives. And that's something that really drew me to the field. It was something that I wanted to work on really from that social science perspective, combining psychology, so combining economics, combining science, and how that comes together to help people really sustain, but then also adapt and mitigate against some of these really, really intense consequences of climate change. So I work as a senior instructional designer here at NCDP. So I'll go into a little bit of what that means in a few moments, but I'm also an adjunct lecturer at Columbia Climate School, where I'm fortunate enough to teach in the graduate school. So as Laurel had mentioned, you'll get a glimpse of kind of collegiate level work. We're going to fast forward and you're going to get a glimpse of graduate level schoolwork. And I don't want that to sound daunting or intimidating by any means, but more so exciting, because I think at the graduate level, we get to really look at these topics very critically. And when we're talking about something like climate injustice, these are things that we need to begin questioning and discussing the research that's out there, things that we can improve across the board, and really challenge some of our understanding and our ideas. And there's a lot of learning that can happen when we take that approach. So in my workshop, everybody's treated very much so like a grad student at that point, where I want to know your expertise just as much as you might be interested in my expertise. So really fruitful discussions, and across the board with every pre-college group that I've been able to work with, they have always surprised me with the level of information they're interested in sharing, and then all of that. So it turns into a really great learning environment. I'm also a fifth-year doctoral candidate at Columbia. I focus primarily on adult learning and how they engage with climate change from a cognitive science standpoint. So how the mind interprets signals and impacts of climate change, and how to best engage large communities down to individuals, decision makers, everything in between. So we will look a little bit at that in this course around how do we rally people around our initiative or our project? What are ways that we can lean into the behavioral science on understanding how different communities are going to engage with climate change? My background, and this is something that I always like to share, especially at the pre-college level, because you might be wondering, what do I major in to get involved with something that is at the climate school or something like the climate school down the road? I actually approach climate change change in a lot of the work that we're doing in research and policy from very much a business perspective, a policy perspective, a psychology and behavioral perspective. So many different interdisciplinary approaches woven in there, and something that we never want to kind of single in on one discipline in this, because we always see, especially when working with human impacts, we need everybody's contribution, everybody's expertise, everyone's lived experiences. And when that comes together, that's when we will have a really excellent learning environment. So in the classroom, I've been fortunate enough to teach quite a bit. And one thing that is pretty unique around my perspective on many of these themes is that much of the work that I do is very practical and applied. It's out in the field. And Columbia has given me a space and a platform to really be able to talk about many of those experiences, to cross-reference the literature that you might be reading in a traditional class, but also pair that with economic recovery, housing recovery initiatives that we've done across the United States. So a lot of the teaching that I'm able to do is taking on what's really going on right now in this moment, and matching that with the research, with the theory, with the science, and figuring out what's going to be applicable. So this is very much going to be a workshop that is going to emphasize the applied, in the sense that whatever we're learning, whatever we're discussing, debating, everything in between, we want it to eventually be something we can do about it, right? It is of course a very healthy exercise to talk about these issues. Don't get me wrong, but we do want to take the next step of what does action look like? What can we do about these things? So some of the courses I've been able to teach at Columbia in different capacities, I do teach a graduate level course on post-disaster economic and housing recovery. With FEMA, I do some trainings on economic recovery for communities, businesses, individuals and households. The pre-college is probably one of my favorite groups to be associated with. So I do teach a course on climate change disasters recovery, pre-college in Vermont with the Green Mountains program. And in the past, I taught a course on response to resilience around the COVID-19 pandemic. So if any of these things or topics sound interesting to you, these are things that we're going to touch upon. But one thing that I'll say that's really unique about this workshop that isn't covered in these classes is the sense that we don't really get to focus as much time as we should on this idea of equity, of climate injustices, what's going on in the world today that has really resided on structural issues that have always historically been there. But now that we have a hurricane or a tornado, a drought, these climate impacts, they're at the forefront. So this is going to be something where it's a very unique opportunity to solely zoom in on these issues, and something that I think is just incredibly applicable all across the board. So this is kind of what a day of life looks like in some of my research. I don't want to spend too much time on this because of course I want to go into what to expect in the workshop, but as I mentioned earlier, I will take a very applied approach just because so much of my work has been field work. But you can see it's all different types of settings. And I think one thing that students benefit from these types of workshops is that what I aim to do is really equip you to be able to have conversations around climate, to propose projects and proposals around climate impacts in any of these types of settings. So you can see all the way here on the left, it's FEMA's headquarters in Washington, D.C. Right next to it is an emergency operating center in Florida, not recently, but very similar to what they're probably experiencing right now. You can see actually there is a storm coming in on that main screen there. The image next to that is I believe a small town in Missouri, if I'm remembering correctly, that had a tornado and into some flooding. So all types of settings and conversations with people across the country. But one other thing that I think is going to be very unique around this workshop is we are going to take a very global approach to it. So in this very last one, you can see this is from a recent meeting in Indonesia, where I was part of the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Global Platform, presenting some of our work that we've done here at Columbia on economic resilience. And this meeting with the United Nations really inspired much of what's going into this workshop, taking many international examples and incorporating lessons learned from all different types of contexts and what equity really looks like when it comes to disasters and preparedness and different resources and programs that are out there. So really happy to kind of talk about any of those experiences in the workshop. But for right now, I think we'll move forward into what to expect. Research and advocacy. I think one thing that you'll also see from this workshop is we're going to learn how to really take on thought leadership. And thought leadership is really a fancy way of saying getting messaging out there to the people that need it at a large scale. So we'll look at the way that we frame disasters, that we frame risk, that we frame climate resilience, and really importantly, how we frame when injustices are occurring in existing policies and existing practices. More or less to get the awareness out there on these issues for many people that are unfortunately on the disadvantage when it comes to these things. So we will look at that and what that looks like, whether it's in a research and a peer-reviewed avenue, or whether it's an opinion article or anything in between that's applicable to you and your context. That's what we really want to zoom in on. The present moment is a very important one to be taking a course like this. This is something that is relevant of the times that we're facing. And I think the present moment has challenged many of our assumptions of climate change, of course, but then also how collective action exists. I think we saw throughout having to navigate climate impacts and intense examples of flooding, fires, everything in between, on top of a global pandemic. And these are things and levels of uncertainty that we're going to spend some time dissecting. It's not necessarily really an instance where we can turn the clock back and do something different, but what we can do is begin to propose solutions that can improve any future challenges of this magnitude. Hopefully we never have to face something like this, but in anticipation, we do need to prepare our strategies. We need to look and under a magnifying glass of where injustices occur, where the outcomes of existing policies, programs are not equipped to support everybody as we navigate through the impacts of climate change here. So the purpose here is really to highlight that all disasters don't necessarily create these inequalities, but they're exposing them. As I mentioned before, many are at the structural level. So this lens that we're trying to develop for climate justice is something that's, of course, applicable to what we're going to be talking about for these several weeks in this workshop, but it's a lens that I hope that we can develop with each other, that you can bring to any context, whether it's down a biology route, down a business route, even a law route. Of course, we need, as I mentioned, all hands on deck, but using this lens is something that as a discipline, we never really have been able to pause collectively and kind of think through, do I have climate justice built into everything that I'm doing, from a research paper to a policy to a national initiative to anything in between, no matter the scale, are we thinking about these things? So in almost every action item that we'll do in the course, we'll want to be taking and adopting this climate justice lens. So through this lens, we are going to focus on solutions. So this isn't going to be week by week talking about all the problems that exist out in the world. That is something that is all that is out there. It's yes, let's identify these problems, as I mentioned, underneath this magnifying glass, but then let's talk about what we can do about it. Let's talk about what existing vehicles through policy, through legislation, but then even at the everyday level in our neighborhoods, what are some things that we can do to address the inequities, to make sure that everybody's prepared, that people can recover from disasters in their own way, and with them under the means that are pre-existing and things like that. So through this, we're going to be really focusing on solutions. Everyone will have an opportunity to propose a project that is going to look at adaptation and mitigation through a climate justice lens, and get an opportunity to actually hear from other Columbia faculty and researchers on their project. So it's going to be, as I mentioned, very applied. I want this to be something that is extremely useful to you, and whatever climate challenge, obstacle that you're currently trying to help out with. I think this is something where we will use our whole learning community as an opportunity to share ideas, to share initiatives, and of course, share guidance on this. And one thing that I really want to focus on that unfortunately in other settings we don't get to do as much is just humanizing these impacts. So here's an example right here. We'll definitely address disaster displacement. So although we see here a disaster survivor, we often miss the mark on looking at all the dimensions of that this is someone who prior to the disaster was homeless, or after the disaster becomes homeless, that is going to likely suffer from trauma, that had interrupted studies. What do we do about something like that? How can we prevent the magnitude of that happening for future disaster events? So behind all the statistics, behind all the charts that we see out there, what we really want to do in this workshop is to look at the human component, the human elements, and the social elements of disasters, and what goes on in the recovery process. To do this as a framework, we kind of look, and I don't want to go too much into a lecture, that's what the workshops are for, but to do this, we are looking at something very similar to what they look at in the public health realm. These are called the social determinants of health. We found in the disaster space that we have almost a direct parallel of disaster recovery. So we're going to look at the social environment. So in the disaster recovery, if people are able to adapt to climate change, how do we enable it so there isn't determinants based on discrimination, on income level, education levels, marital status, physical environment? How are things mapped out in our physical cities, in our towns, in rural communities that are putting people in harm's way potentially? And what are some of the mechanisms that go into mitigation, adaptation for that? Crowding conditions, built environment, as I mentioned before, kind of our cities, how we're structured there. Access to programs, access to healthcare, everything like that has played a key role, and we'll spend time within each of these sections here. Ultimately, what we're going to look at is redefining resilience, but also looking at community resilience. You can see here, I love these two images here, because when we think of resilience, sometimes we're thinking of and I shouldn't say we, but for researchers here, and I'll just use myself. Sometimes we have the assumption when we're thinking about community resilience, it's a very Western ideology of what resilience means, but it's so much more than that. And I think looking at some of these international examples of what a community truly means, how they have faced disasters with limited resources, limited budgets, and just remarkable stories there. And what can we learn from them? So this idea of looking at economic development, our social capital, information, community competence, reducing risk and resource inequities, just to scratch the surface on some of the things that we're going to be talking about. So what to expect? I think I might be coming up to time soon. Yeah, I'm coming up to time, so I gotta get to questions real quick. But really quickly, just what to expect. It's going to be a combination of presentations. I really like to invite a lot of peers, colleagues, mentors of mine to come into the class and share their vantage points, who will also have guest lectures from the field that can talk to some of the topics that we're talking to, so you get as many perspectives as possible. We're going to have applied practice where we'll be working together to solve some of these problems and challenges. And then there'll be a practicum project, as I mentioned earlier, that you'll be able to get feedback from other Columbia faculty and researchers on that are very close to the field. Plenty of goals and objectives here. And without reading them all off, what I will do to summarize them is basically say, you are going to be able to acquire a significant amount of skills on the analysis front, on the social sciences front, on the geographic information systems front, and just looking at climate adaptation and mitigation in a brand new way that is inclusive of all people. Here are the dates and times. And you can see they're pretty well chunked and time ranges. So 10 a.m. to noon. So not too much Zoom fatigue or anything like that. And we'll be able to adapt the curriculum based on feedback and based on your own interests as well. I'm going to pause there for water and hand it back to Laurel for any questions. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Josh. That was incredible. I think everyone here has a really strong understanding of all the skills and knowledge that they're going to be able to gain by being a part of your workshop. So I want to open it up to questions. Feel free to pop any questions that you have in the Q&A, especially while we have Josh here. It'd be great for him to answer any content-related questions, and I'm happy to answer any registration-related questions. So someone asks, what is the schedule for these classes? Are they via Zoom or in person? They are, just to reiterate, everything is virtual. It's all held via Zoom. And the program is specifically designed to be flexible to your schedule. So while they are Saturdays from October to December, everything is going to be recorded. So you have access to all these recordings for up to 1 year and the materials included. So if you miss a session or have to leave early, no problem. You can absolutely just watch on your own and come for the next session with questions. There is no application process. I'm actually going to put the website where you can look at registration right in the chat for everyone. This is just a registration-based workshop, and at the completion of the workshop, you will be receiving a certificate from the Columbia Climate School. The cost is in this academic year for 2022 to 2023, the cost is $1,499. But I also want to say that there are reduced rates under certain circumstances. So people that have participated in workshops before, current students, anything like that, you can reach out to me. And I am happy to go over a little bit more about those reduced rates in an email on a one-on-one basis. And I will put that email in the chat again for everyone. And another question, would you recommend this program to a beginner interested in climate change? Josh, I'm going to let you take that one.
Yes. So we will cover a little bit of the climate science that is in its own workshop. It's its own course for sure. But I will offer solutions, not solution, I'm sorry, resources on introduction to climate science and climate change, just so that everybody starts on day one at the same place. And then one thing I'm happy to do at any point of these sessions is to stay before or after any of the sessions to talk through if any of it's unclear or if this is definitely brand new. I'm happy to kind of go through the 101. This is meant to be accessible to everybody who's interested. So anything that I can do to make sure that you're caught up or you get your questions are answered around that, I'd be happy to do it. But there will be some support materials to get you caught up on climate change.
That's fantastic. And I will also say that I've actually led a pre-college workshop in the spring semester of last year, and we had such a wide range of students in terms of their background knowledge, grade levels. I had rising ninth graders all the way to seniors, and it really makes all these different backgrounds and like diversity of perspectives really makes for a rich discussion. So yeah, that's really great. Someone asks, the schedule of Saturday 10th to 12th coincides with the Columbia Science Honors Program for high school students. Would it be helpful not to coincide your timings, or else we cannot attend? Understood. Okay, so I am not too familiar with the Columbia Science Honors Program. But again, these programs are virtual. So of course, it would be ideal to attend in person so you can be a part of these rich discussions and ask questions. But if you do have to miss a few, you can always catch up virtually. And I'm sure Josh wouldn't mind answering emails as well if you watch a virtual session and then have some follow-up questions that you would like to ask right away. And how many people will be in the class? That's another really great question. So we want to have a minimum of at least 8 students. And we find that anything less than that, you really, a key thing about these workshops also is the ability to network with like-minded peers, especially because these workshops, we have people coming from all over the world. So we like to have at least 8 people. And we don't like much more than, I think 20 is our cap. But I think we're able to be flexible with that. Perfect. And what time zone is the timing? So this is Eastern time. Josh, do you know the time frame of these Saturday workshops that you're planning to do? Oh, sorry, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern time. So all of them are 2 hours except for the last session, which is 3 hours. And if you, again, are looking for any answers on rates or reduced rates, please email me at learn@climate.columbia.edu. And I put that in the chat. I'll just copy it and put it in once more. Okay. Can Josh talk a little bit more about the practicum?
Sure. Yeah, so the practicum is going to be something we'll all collaborate on together for the most part, but it's going to be something that is going to ask you to zoom in on your community, on the people that you're hoping to kind of assist in their climate understanding or in the mitigation or an adaptation. These projects can really range. One thing that we've seen is a student, for example, was concerned around their school being in a floodplain. And one of the things that they wanted to workshop, and these are things like, this is as Laurel just mentioned, you'll be in a community of like-minded individuals that are going to be able to bounce ideas off of each other. And what we'll want to do with the practicum is it's going to really be kind of things that we can workshop together. So you'll get a lot of different perspectives from students as well as myself, and of course some experts in the field on how to execute and implement. So we're really implementation focused. So if you come and want to propose an idea for your practicum, for example, taking that school in a floodplain where they're looking to build a temporary flood wall around their school, and how to do that and what type of investment that would look like. What we would do is team up as a class and kind of think, what's the communication strategy have to look like? What's the financing look like for that? What are the partners that we need to incorporate into, like, stakeholders for that? So the practicum is going to be really for you to kind of drive, but for all of us collectively to help you to develop, so that you feel confident going into your community or going into wherever you'd like to share that project with a plan, and address, ideally the practicum would address some issues of equity as well. So looking at how can we better equip our communities to have equitable responses to disasters, but wide range of projects, but we're all here to kind of support the idea development. So that's more or less the practicum. And the 7th there is a 3-hour session, because that's when you'll actually be able to present and kind of pitch your practicum to some experts and get some feedback.
Fantastic. Thank you, Josh. And I think that pretty much answered Rohan's question, giving an example of a project. I mean, there was a group of students working on building a removable floodgate around a floodplain, you said. So it's really wonderful to be able to look at challenges in each of your communities that could be very different, but to, as Josh said, bounce ideas off of each other so you can develop the best solutions. And oh yes, this recording will be shared on our website, as well as we will send you the recording in an email, so you can revisit any of the material that Josh went through today. And I also want to remind everyone, registration closes October 15th. So if this is something you're interested in, I really encourage everyone to sign up earlier than later, so you can ensure that your spot is secure. Great. I think with that, we are all set. Oh, some people are asking about the availability. We have quite a bit of an availability. I believe only 1 to 2 spots have registered so far. But typically after the info session, more registrants start to populate for these workshops. So again, earlier than later to secure your position. All right, I think that's it. Josh, thank you so much for spending the past 30 or so minutes with us. And thank you for everyone that joined us tonight. Again, feel free to reach out to my email if you have any questions about registration or rates. And we look forward to seeing you at the workshop.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate the time. Take care.
Bye.